G'day guys, we've finally got our hands on the final balance update for 2025 and the World Leaders took some interesting nerfs. So in today's video we're going to discuss particularly the Slaughterbound and whether or not these nerfs make him unviable or whether he still is a staple of competitive World Leaders lists. So let's get stuck into it.
Exalted.
Unlike some other gaming systems, Warhammer 40k often requires an absolute boatload of dice to play. For example, watch me roll out my attacks with these 20 Khorne Berserkers. Follow the links in the description to get your Exalted dice today. Alrighty guys, so basically the Slaughterbound has gone up in points and the Berserker's Glaive, which is a relic that we normally give him, has also gone up in points, and this results in the Slaughterbound going up to 135 points if you take him in this package. And interestingly, that makes him roughly the same points cost as an additional 3 Exalted 8-bound. So the way I see it, we've got a few different options the way that we can pursue this. We can either continue running the Slaughterbound with 3 Exalted 8-bound and giving him the Berserker's Glaive, or we can run 6 Exalted 8-bound, or we can run 2 units of 3 Exalted 8-bound. All of those options cost roughly the same points, and are going to fulfill roughly the same role on the battlefield, which is dealing with enemy mech. So the question is, which of those 3 options should we take? Now, I used Adept Roll to run some numbers on this, and basically, for those who don't know, Adept Roll is a really cool app where you can basically input unit profiles, and then it'll automatically generate your predicted results based on mathematical probabilities. And what it does, it essentially runs 1,000 simulations and then gives you the average. G'day guys, let's take a second to thank today's sponsor, Adept Roll, a bloody ripper app that calculates expected outcomes across a variety of in-game scenarios with precision. With Adept Roll, you can input or import unit profiles to calculate probabilities of outcomes and apply modifiers both offensively and defensively within seconds, allowing you to make wiser and more informed decisions when writing lists and when making in-game decisions. Adept Roll is free to use, or grab the paid version, which is an inexpensive and packed full of fair dinkum features that will help you play like an exalted wargamer today. Thanks again to Adept Roll for sponsoring the video, and now let's get back to the show, so that you can get an understanding of what's going to do what damage, right? Now, with the idea that this unit is specifically there to solve the mech in your opponent's matchups, like if you want to kill infantry, you've got Khorne Berserkers, Spawn, you know, they're 8-bound, they're really good at killing those sorts of things. This unit is specifically there to deal with your opponent's mech, particularly heavy mech. Because toughness 9 vehicles, 8-bound are actually pretty good at killing, and you know, those smaller vehicles like your rhinos and stuff like that, this unit is designed for if you go up against Imperial Knights, or if your opponent has a Land Raider, or if they're, you know, something big, right? So, comparing them in that regard, the Slaughterbound with the Glaive and the 3 8-bound does roughly the same damage as 6 8-bound. It's very, very close. So that one Slaughterbound does almost as much damage as all 3 8-bound. Now, this is but there's a few things worth noting here. One of them is that this is on the turn in which he uses his once per game ability to gain those extra 3 attacks. So when you go in on the charge and you hit with this guy, you're, you know, on your go turn, so to speak, he's going to fuck shit up. But then for the rest of the game, he's actually quite bad compared to 3 Exalted 8-bound. So that's one factor. The other factor is that against other targets that are not that giant mech, and like I said, they're roughly the same into that giant mech, into other targets, the 8-bound are going to be better, because the 8-bound you get 3 of them, and they're going to have 5 attacks each on the charge, so you're going in with 15 attacks every turn, whereas the Slaughterbound, when he goes in, he's only getting 10 attacks on that go turn, and then every other turn he's only getting like 6 or 7 attacks, so he doesn't have anywhere near as much output in terms of volume in his attacks, but he does have that, you know, that higher hit rate, hits on 2+, he gets dev wounds on the charge, so there are some areas in which the Slaughterbound is better. So I think comparing those two, it's actually quite close. There's some sort of niche scenarios where each one's going to be better. So, for example, the 6-man Exalted is going to have more OC. So if you're planning to, like, rapid ingress, go out, charge something, pile in onto an objective with your 6-inch pile in and consolidate, consolidate onto that objective, and then out OC your opponent, you're going to be much more able to do that with a 6-man than with a 3-man with the Slaughterbound attached. So that's one element. The other element is that the Slaughterbound and 3 has a slightly smaller footprint than the 6-man. Obviously, 6 bodies versus 4. The Slaughterbound is on a bigger base, so it's not quite, the same, but basically that Slaughterbound and 8-bound unit has a smaller footprint, which is going to make it easier for you to hide. When you're rapid ingressing and you want to make sure that you're somewhere where you can't be seen by your opponent, that's going to be a little bit easier to do with that Slaughterbound unit. Other considerations, the Slaughterbound unit gives up an Assassinate point, so if that makes them vulnerable in that it can give your opponent victory points that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. If you send 6 Exalted 8-bound in, blow up a knight, then pile in and do your thing, and then in your opponent's next turn they draw Assassinate, you're like, cool, the only character that you can see is Khan, and he's all the way back here in a Rhino, so you can't kill him. Whereas if you've just sent out your Slaughterbound and your 8-bound, killed that knight, now you've got that unit exposed in the middle of your opponent's army, well, now he's just going to turn around and kill it, right? The Slaughterbound does have the ability to resurrect models. However, I've played a ton of games with this guy, and it has never come into effect, because basically once that unit comes out, my opponent always looks at it and goes, oh my god, I need to kill that unit. So, the resurrecting models thing, I don't think that's super relevant as a factor. What other considerations are there? There's the fact that with a 6-man you can string out a little bit further. So say you're playing into Imperial Knights, and they've got 4 or 5 War Dogs or Armigers, and then a couple of big guys. You can string out and go, cool, I'm going to put 2 or 3 into this Armiger, and then I'm going to have 1 or 2 here to keep coherency, and then I'm going to put 2 or 3 into this other one, sort of stringing out. Whereas if you've just got the Slaughterbound and the 3, you don't really have that capacity to do that. It also allows you to do things like go, cool, I'm going to charge these. Let's say your opponent has a knight that has fights first. You can go, cool, I'm going to string out back here. I'm going to charge this Armiger, and I'm going to stay outside of 6 inches of that big Rampager that has fights first. I'm going to stay outside of 6, and then I'm going to use my 6-inch pile in to swing these 3 or 4 guys in so that they can hit that big knight before he fights. You can't do that if you're only running a small unit, or it's at least much harder to do that if you're running a small unit. So there's tons of considerations here. So weigh all of that up when you're making a decision. I think it's a relatively difficult decision, the 6-man or the 3-man with the character. There's a few other considerations. One of them is that character has access to precision via the strat, the Heroic Challenge strat. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you want to charge that Necron Warrior Brick and you want to kill all their characters so that they don't just continue resurrecting into infinity, there's the advantage of having characters in your army for that purpose. There's a lot of different ways that you can sort of slice this. I personally think I would lean more towards the 6-man. My main considerations and the main reasons that I think that is, I like the idea of being able to string the unit out. I also like that unit's a bit more durable than the quote-unquote 4-man. Like, if you have 3 guys and a Slaughterbound, Slaughterbound's got twice as many wounds, so it's kind of like having a 5-man unit, whereas the 6-man is a 6-man, so it's a little bit tougher. The OC, I think, is actually kind of big, because if you've got, if there's an OC 5 model on an objective, which is a pretty common OC value for vehicles and things like that, or 5-man squads of OC 1 dorks, if you want to out OC that, you can't do it with the 4-man squad, because that's only 4 OC, whereas with the 6-man you've got an extra 2 OC. So, and one of the most common things that we do with our World Eaters is we charge things, we kill them, and then we consolidate onto objectives and deny our opponent those victory points. That is a strategy that's much harder to pull off when you're running the 4-man. So yeah, I think I lean more towards the 6-man for all of those reasons considered. But then we get our third option here, which is What about two 3-man units, right? It's the same points as one 6-man. Now, there are a lot of pros and cons on this. I've actually done several detailed videos, which I'll put links in the description to, when considering large or big squads and how to sort of make that decision. I'll go over a few of them now, though. The main one is that if you take a big squad, the advantages you get is that you get stratagem utility. Like if you go, cool, I want to spend a CP to get, plus AP, you can get that across the whole unit. Whereas if you've got 2 units of 3, you've got to kind of pick one or the other. So that's one advantage. The other advantage is that if you're charging somebody and they have the ability to interrupt, you can fight with all 6 Exalted 8-bound before your opponent gets an opportunity. Whereas if you have 2 units of 3, you fight with the first 3, and then if you don't kill it, it's then going to be able to spend 2 command points and interrupt, and then it's going to fight the other 3 before they strike. So having a single unit of 6 allows you to get around that challenge, which I think, given the role that we have the Exalted 8-bound in the list for, I actually think that's a pretty reasonable consideration, because we want to be able to go, hey, that Rampager over there, so let's say that's a Lancer, right? A Lancer is a really good example, because 3 aren't going to kill a Lancer. So if you throw 2 units of 3 in, you're going to fight with the first 3, you're going to get that Lancer to half health, and then it's going to interrupt and kill the other 3. Maybe it kills 2 of them, and now that one that survives fights, it doesn't kill the Lancer. And now you've just thrown a 6-man brick at a Lancer and you've bounced. Whereas if you throw it as a single unit of 6 as opposed to 2 units of 3, now all 6 of them get to fight before your opponent gets to react. So I think in the specific stuff there's a lot of things to say for the 6-man unit. It's got a lot of utility. However, the 2 3-mans also have some pretty crazily powerful utility that has to be considered. And the primary one here is that it allows you to layer your attacks. You can go, cool, I'm going to send in one unit, and I'm going to keep the other unit back, and then next turn I'm going to send in the other unit. Whereas if they're a single unit of 6, it's all or nothing. You're either sending all 6 out, or you're not sending any out. And I think one of World Eater's biggest strengths is that sort of layered attack, where we go, cool, we're going to send out, some spawn, just a really small sort of contingent goes out, then your opponent has to overreact to kill the spawn. Then you're like, cool, now I'm going to send out a single unit 8-bound and a Hellbrute or something like that. You wipe out everything that they sent, and now they have to respond, and they often overreact. And then you go, cool, now I'm hitting you with Khan's unit and some Exalted 8-bound. Clear that. Sort of that trading game back and forth. And that's facilitated by having 2 3-man units. If you have a single 6-man, it makes that trading game much, much harder. So there's so many things to consider. I think the other thing worth noting is that if you have a 6-man, you can rapid ingress all 6 at once, whereas if you've got 2 3-mans, you can only rapid ingress one of those units. So that's what I'm talking about with the stratagem utility. You get a little bit more utility out of the stratagems. But it's also worth noting your opponent also gets a little bit more utility out of their stratagems. Like if they have a stratagem that allows them to reroll wounds into a particular target, or if they want to Oath of Moment something, or, those sorts of rules, they get a bit more utility out of the big unit as well. So there's lots of stuff going on there. I think one of the things that you want to consider is your local meta. If you have a lot of like Imperial Knights or things like that, and that's specifically what you've tooled this unit for solving for, then the 6-man is better. I think it goes the 6-man, shortly followed by the 3-man with the glaive with the glaive Slaughterbound. He's good as well. Like I think there's nothing wrong with that as an option. And then the distant third option would be the 2 3-mans if you're trying to solve for combat Imperial Knights. It's worth noting that if they're a shooting knight, like a despoiler, or what do they call it, a castigator? No, that's the Sisters of Battle Tank. God, there's so many unit names. The Imperial Knight that shoots. If you're going into those, 2 3-mans is fine, because they're not going to interrupt, and if they do, they're not going to kill any 8-bound because they don't have melee weapons, right? You're only really concerned when going into the melee knights when it comes to the difference between a 6-man and 2 3-mans. So consider all of those things when making that decision and looking at whether or not you want the Slaughterbound 6-man or 2 3-mans. And then the other thing to look at is the broader meta. All right, if there's not a ton of knights in your meta, and you're dealing with like people who run lots of like rhinos and smaller vehicles, then you're probably better off with the 2 3-mans, because you can send a 3-man out, kill a rhino, consolidate onto something, and keep the other 3-man safe. If they're running a lot of infantry, then you definitely want to take the 8-bound over the Slaughterbound, because the Slaughterbound into other infantry, he's really good on that one turn when he gets his super ability. But outside of that, those 3 8-bound are going to get a shitload more attacks than that one Slaughterbound, and that's going to get you value over and over and over. I think into sort of more balanced metas and more balanced armies, you're probably better off with the 2 3-man. Like I said, for the fact that you can layer it, the fact that you can engage multiple things at once, even if they're distant. Like, you can go, cool, this 3-man 8-bound, like, they might both be staged behind a ruin, but you're like, this 3-man's going to go over that way, and this 3-man's going to go over that way, and now all of a sudden you're engaging your opponent on multiple fronts. You can't do that if you have the character. You can't do that if you're a 6-man unit. So I think into the broadest possible meta, the 2 3-mans is the best. Into the big knight meta, the 6-man is the best. And then the question becomes, how likely do you think you are to verse those big knights? Is that, is there somebody in your local meta that is prominent, that attends every tournament, that runs this, that you always tend to lose against that person? Well, if that's the case, then you need to probably consider putting this in your list. Whereas if that's not the case, you can probably get away without doing it. And yeah, that's the sort of approach that you want to take when making this decision. So for me personally, I'm going to be going with the multiple 3-mans. I'm just going to go, cool. I'm probably going to take 3 3-man Exalted, 3 3-man 8-bound, and just go, cool. Now I have 6 tools that I can sort of use for whichever situation calls for it. But I still think that glaive Slaughterbound is very, very good. And when people see him, they will be scared, especially like. One of the psychological factors that kicks in, when something gets a nerf, people go, oh, it got nerfed because it's really, really good. So then when you run it and you say to your opponent, I've got the Slaughterbound and he has the Berserker's Glaive, people go, oh my god, that's that guy that was so good they had to nerf him, right? And then your opponent's going to like massively overreact. And that psychological element can be a really, really powerful weapon when you're playing the game, because what you can do is you can put him in strategic reserves, and now your opponent is going to like overinvest in screening you and overinvest in preventing him from getting in. And that's hopefully going to open up opportunities for your Spawn or your regular 8-bound or your Berserkers or your Demon Prince or whatever it is that you have. It's going to open up opportunities for those units to go out and do their damage, which is really cool. So it's not all doom and gloom when something cops points nerfs. Most of my lists went up between 30 and 35 points. So it's going to be interesting pulling them apart and shaving them back. I've got a tournament coming up in early January, so I'm going to be writing some lists over the coming weeks, and then I'll be doing a video breaking down all of the lists that I wrote, and then we can have a discussion in the comments of that list, of that video, on which list we should run. But I just wanted to sort of jump in here and share my thoughts on the points update for the Slaughterbound and the Exalted 8-bound. And then also the other thing was Angron went down in points. I think I can sum that up pretty fast by saying, who cares? He's still crap. For 340 points, he's still way too expensive. You'd be better off getting 2 Mauler Fiends and having 40 points worth of change. I think he's just too expensive. He's too slow. If he got a detachment sort of like Fulgrim, if there was a way to get him to run through walls, all of a sudden we'd be talking. But the fact that he's got a 14-inch move and he can't move through walls means that he's going to spend a lot of time walking around. Your opponent's going to be able to move block him super duper easily because he's got a big base, and it's going to make him very miserable to play. I think people will very much unenjoy playing him, and I think that's the problem. And he's too expensive to be a unit that you just like rapid ingress that unit, send it in, kill something, and then it dies, and you're okay with that. Like, he's too expensive to be thrown away like that, and he's too slow to get multiple uses. So yeah, Angron's no good. The Goremongers went down. That's cool. That's a very reasonable unit to select in your army. It's really good facilitating those scout moves, etc. All in all, I think the World Eaters actually came off pretty well in this update. I think yes, we copped some nerfs, and the buffs that we got were relatively insignificant. However, other factions got nerfed way harder. And some of those other factions were things that, could be problems for us. Like looking at Eldar, looking at Admech, looking at there's like a ton of things that got way worse. And I think we got off pretty light. So overall, I think World Eaters are still in an absolutely fantastic place. And yeah, so as always, thank you for tuning in. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section below about the Exalted 8-bound, the Slaughterbound, what you think the best approach there is, what your thoughts on the balanced data slate in general are. And then over the coming weeks, I'll be recording another video where I'm basically going to put up like 4 or 5 different lists. We'll have a conversation about those 4 or 5 lists, and then we'll decide which one I want to take to the Australian ITC Championships, which is Adelaide Uprising, and that's in early January. So yeah, that's where we're at. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.